Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Super Feeler podcast. My name is Lori, and I'm joined today by Shannon, Kat, and Dave for our DBT skills series. As you know, we are nearing the end of this series, which is being supported by our read-through of DBT for Life by Diana Partington, a really great DBT skills book that recently came out. And we're really using that book as a guide to our discussions about skills, how we use them. We all live with or have lived with borderline personality disorder and have used dialectical behavior therapy skills to help us live a life worth living. So none of us are clinicians, but we are just, sharing a little bit about what we use in our lives, and it's been really fun. So if you've listened to this series before, you'll know that every chapter of this book starts with a story, just to give a little bit of an example of this skill. And Shannon has gratefully offered to review the story for us.
Okay, so in this one, Andrea is a freshman, and because I'm in Australia, I'm assuming that's the beginning of high school. Is that right?
I honestly have no idea. Dave's the only one who's going to know. Okay, beginning of high school. And then also, while I'm interrupting, just want to give a trigger warning for this story because it is about sexual assault. So just a heads up if that's difficult for you. I'll try and put a timestamp in the chat of when we are done with the story.
So Andrea is a freshman and she is usually a rule follower, but she sneaks out to a party with a guy called Brandon, who is a senior that she really likes. And she knows that her parents wouldn't approve, so she doesn't tell them that she's going. She just sneaks out without them knowing. She's a little bit uneasy from the start because Brandon arrives with 3 other guys in the car and they immediately hand her alcohol. She wants to fit in, so she drinks despite her discomfort around it. At the party, Brandon is very attentive to her. He lavishes her with attention and keeps passing on the drinks. When she tells him that she doesn't drink, he jokes, "Welcome to high school, beers, bonfires and booty." And if that's not a red flag, I don't know what is. But she laughs to avoid upsetting him, even though she finds the joke a little bit uncomfortable. Brandon convinces her to leave the party and the people with him, and when she agrees, he invites his friend Tyler to come along. Once they're away from the crowd, they rape Andrea. After that part's over, she feels unable to call her parents because they obviously don't know where she is. So she begs some girls for a ride home. She doesn't tell the girls what happened. She sneaks inside, takes off her clothes, jumps in the shower, scrubs herself, and then she hides the clothes in the top of a wardrobe because she's scared that her mum will see them and then start to ask questions about why she was wearing them and why they were dirty. She's completely overcome with shame and fear, and she stays silent, convinced that no one will believe her. Once she's back at school, Brandon completely ignores her, but his friends snicker at her when she walks past, which just deepens her shame and humiliation. Her distress builds and she begins to self-harm. A few weeks later, Brandon sends her a taunting text with images of her and the 2 boys during the assault and makes some pretty vile comments around her refusing to send him nudes in the past and that he doesn't have to ask for permission now because he has them. This pushes Andrea into crisis and she attempts suicide. After she's found by her parents, she's hospitalised. She goes into the ER and then into a youth psychiatric facility, but she still remains silent about the assault. She's terrified of her parents because her phone's been taken off her in the hospital. She's terrified that her parents will see the images that are on her phone. During her stay there, she is enrolled in a DBT therapy group and she recognises a girl there called Isabella who goes to her school. She's got a bit of a tarnished reputation and there's been some gossip around Isabella, but Andrea starts to realise that some of that stuff is false. Isabella's quite vocal within the group and feels comfortable there, and she speaks a lot about a group of boys at their school who regularly harass female students. Andrea stays quiet but resents Isabella for bringing the topic up. You can understand that she's probably got some concern about being exposed in that. In a session, Isabella describes her frustration and how she's channeled it into action, and she gathers some signatures from other girls who have been harassed at the school. Andrea's a bit inspired by this and kind of it boosts her hope that maybe that there'll be some change. But when Isabella shares that the school counsellor kind of dismisses the efforts, her hope fades again and she kind of just falls back into that distress cycle. The group discusses alternative rebellion and using anger productively. Isabella explores ways to fight back using that alternative rebellion rather than maladaptive coping mechanisms around the rage that she feels about what's going on in her school. And they discuss some things like gathering more signatures and staging a protest. And she invites Andrea to help, but Andrea declines. The following week at school, Andrea sees Brandon harassing another girl and wonders if he has assaulted her as well. She wants to offer this girl support, but in the moment, she's a little bit too scared. Later that same day, Brandon corners her under a stairwell and he uses, I'm going to say he sexually assaults her because he pushes his pelvis against her and holds her against a wall in an attempt to intimidate her. But while that's happening, Andrea kind of gets a little bit brave. I think she feels rage and that turns into bravery. And for the first time, she kind of pushes back and she says, "You don't get to treat girls like this," and pushes him away, and she immediately runs to find Isabella, which she does. She apologises to Isabella for being a bit cold towards her during the DBT sessions, and Isabella warmly accepts her apology and says to Andrea that she's sorry for whatever has happened to her. At the next group session, Andrea also says that she wants to be involved. So this is the catalyst to her then being involved in Isabella's movement. At the next group session, Andrea takes pride in helping Isabella report their progress despite the difficulty of speaking up about it in front of her mum. So obviously this DBT group, the parents, go along too. The movement had gained a lot of traction and had uncovered more victims, including LGBTQ students. And that night, Andrea's parents remind her that they love her and support her, and they respect her decision, that she doesn't feel comfortable talking about it. And she admits that she's not ready to share her experience yet and gets a lot of support from her parents in that. 2 nights later, Isabella calls Andrea and lets her know that there is a story breaking on the news that 3 boys from their school, including Brandon and Tyler, have been charged with aggravated sexual assault. The movement that the girls had created at their school had encouraged these girls to come forward, and Andrea realises that she holds the crucial evidence, being the clothes and the images that she has on her phone, to actually help support these girls who are brave enough to come forward and to actually help convict these guys. She decides that she's ready to tell her story, and she does so first to Isabella and then to her parents and then to the police.
Thanks so much, Shannon, for summarizing that story so well. Definitely a story that I think a lot of people can relate to. And so just wanting to give space for any feelings that come with stories like this that are unfortunately all too common. The skill that we're talking about in this chapter is alternate rebellion, which truthfully is a skill that I didn't remember from DBT. Did anybody remember this from DBT? Dave did. Dave, do you want to talk a little bit about what this skill means?
Yeah, so, and it's probably good that this is going to come out after we talk to Diana, but I think she sort of misunderstood this skill. Like this is not, at least this is not like what I understood alternate rebellion is. It is other skills, including effectiveness, right? I mean, like doing things and in a way that comes at an issue so that you get what you want, and a whole bunch of other ones. But I don't think it's alternate rebellion. And I actually today I actually went back because I was like, maybe I'm just wrong, but I went back and looked at the Bible.
The official. Dave's never wrong, but also the official.
No, I am often. I just it's this is one that I thought was kind of silly the first time I heard about it, and then I started thinking about it more. It's not one that's super relevant, that I found super relevant, but I get it. So it's actually in the book. It's actually included in the section of distress tolerance on addiction, and the idea is that if you're using addictive behaviors as a way to get attention, or as a way, as it puts it, to rebel against authority or conventions or boredom, it says alternate rebellion replaces destructive rebellion with rebellion that is non-destructive. So examples they have that you could do instead are shave your head, wear crazy underwear, wear unmatched shoes. This is a weird one. Vacation with your family at a nudist colony. I don't know about that, but
what?
Yeah.
Oh my God, Marsha is hilarious.
Finding out things about Marsha that nobody wants to know.
Yeah, no kidding.
Wild color, get a tattoo or a body piercing. It also says don't bathe for a week. So I don't know about that. But the point is, look, these are things that are transgressive on some level or to some people. But they also, it's like if you don't bathe for a week, then you can just take a shower and it's fine. And it does strike me as, again, it's not something that I've ever done, partly because my experience of borderline was more of I just want to hide from the world. But, again, being around people, I have heard people, in the Superpeeler group and on podcasts talk about that, there are some people who their impulses lead them to, it's I, got a tattoo on my face that says fuck you or something, and it's and that, and again, look, maybe I'm not saying that everybody who does that, it's a bad thing, but there are also people who say, I went and I was mad and I smashed somebody's car up, because they hurt me. And, maybe what alternate rebellion is, it's more along the lines of instead of smashing the car up, maybe I'm going to make an effigy of them and smash it up in my backyard with a baseball bat. You know what I mean? Which is it's, again, it's transgressive. You're getting out some feelings. You're doing something that's a little bit bad, but you're also not doing something that is going to result in you going to jail or doing long-term damage to your body or doing those things. So, and I also I don't really see this story as being an example of that. To me, in some ways that, and some of the other examples of things you can give, that you could do, there was some guy who was going to he wanted to do graffiti in favor of Black Lives Matter, but he decided to do it with chalk instead of with paint. And it's I don't think alternative rebellion means fighting injustice with methods that won't get you arrested, or with less in your face methods, which seem to be what this is getting at, and also what the story is sort of getting at. I mean, there are some things that are worth, some injustices that are worth getting arrested over. I don't think Marsha Linehan would have said to students in the 1960s who were protesting segregated lunch counters, hey, maybe don't go into the lunch counter and sit there till you get arrested. Maybe just sit outside and have your lunch out in front of the place as an alternate rebellion. That's not, I don't think that's what she means. It's more like what we're talking about, where it's, instead of getting that tattoo on your face of an expletive, get a tattoo of an expletive somewhere where you can decide whether you're going to share it with people or go to a nudist colony with your family. But that's your own.
Nudist colony with your family. Yeah, I really am so glad you looked into the official version of this, because I was underwhelmed. I thought the story was really powerful, actually. Kind of as a story, as opposed to a skill necessarily. And as Shannon was sharing the story, I don't know if you all know about Giselle Pellicot or Pellicot, depending on how French you want to say it, who was raped by her husband and a whole bunch of other people, and just did a very I mean, if you don't know the story, you need to find out about the story because it is one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard in my life. But, taking this, deciding to be open about her own sexual assault to change the stigma and shame that, because she says like shame should shift to the perpetrator rather than the victim. Like that is huge rebellion, like incredible rebellion, so powerful, has changed, I think, everybody's life who has read this story. But I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call that risk-free rebellion, I guess. Is kind of like how I'm thinking about it, right? Like I was originally thinking, Dave, when you were speaking, like, well, us being open about our diagnosis is like a rebellion in some ways, which is a good example, except like there is risk to that. And we've accepted that risk, but there is still risk to that. It's a tough one because, yeah, I mean, smashing people's cars, not a good idea. But I've seen people like in the dust on like the back of Cybertrucks recently, like drawing dicks in the dust. You know what? I love that. Do that. Don't smash their car. Nobody likes Elon Musk, but let's not smash people's cars because they bought a Tesla, right? Yeah, I don't know. Does this skill like resonate for people? Like Dave, it sounds like it's kind of something that you have in the back of your head, but it's not something that you're necessarily like thinking about on a regular basis.
Well, and it wasn't. I mean, I just want to be, everything you just said, I thought was terrific, and I just wanted to clarify like one or two things, which is that like number one, like I think that like the thing that I objected to about the way that including this as an alternate rebellion is, to me, this is just bravery, like doing something. The Bellicott trial, like that's just bravery, and calling it alternate rebellion, I think in some ways it kind of diminishes a bit the fact that it's just raw bravery.
Yeah.
And turns it into more of like, here's a skill so that you can be less distressed. And that's not what that is to me. That's somebody choosing to confront head on really distressing situation and be really brave. So that was more that. And then also it's not, so for example, like, to me, doing chalk graffiti instead of paint graffiti could be an alternate rebellion. I would hate for people who are upset about social justice wrongs feeling like the skills say, hey, you should dial down your responses to them in order to be skillful. Right. So I guess more than anything, it's just, it's context based. And
yeah. And I don't think that there's been a more important time to talk about that in our lifetime. So I really appreciate you clarifying that, because we have to do the shit now. There is no option, right? We can't be like, it says in here, like, skip instead of walking. Like, cool. Well, who's that? Like, what is that rebelling against, other than like maybe social norms about how you should walk? But like, that doesn't seem like the most important thing that we should be focusing on right now, when there's so much to be focusing on.
It is getting attention, though. I mean, in other words, I think that, and I say this with love for people who are suffering from BPD, but like, it is, one of the things that I experienced was, you can say it like that we need love or whatever, but it is experienced as a need for attention by people. And there are ways you can seek attention that are destructive to other people and to myself. And there are also ways like skipping where like, I'm going to get some attention if I'm a 46-year-old man skipping down the street. But guess what? Like, nobody's getting hurt, not me and nobody else. So if I have an itch to scratch to get some attention, like, skip.
Yeah. Fair. It's like, I guess the question for me is like, is that rebellion? But like, maybe we're going into way too many semantics for the sake of this skill. I kind of wish that they hadn't ended on this skill, because I feel like it's a bit like meh in terms of the usefulness of skills at least in my life, and like the lives that I, the people that I talk to all the time. But yeah, I would be curious to know why the order is this way. Kat, how about you? Does this skill resonate? Did you remember it?
Not so much. I mean, yeah, in terms of like thinking about things that are more skillful when urged they're not skillful. I think it was presented that way when I've seen it. This kind of, at the moment, resonates on two layers, one of which is that I was groomed and raped as a teenager, so it's very close to home. And, I didn't tell anyone at the time. But then, there was Me Too, but then even before Me Too, there was a website where everyone shared their stories. It was just there, and you could read like thousands and thousands of stories, and it was just really validating. And then the other layer is that I spent today at the Scottish Parliament for International Women's Day, where we spoke about war and peace and women, and it just seemed especially poignant, now when Apple and Google have both removed International Women's Day from their calendars. It's just, yeah, and like you say, we need rebellion now more than ever.
When I read this, I kind of felt a little bit, well, I was triggered. There's a whole ton of stuff that I can relate to in here. But I tried to, and it kind of made me feel bad because I felt like those injustices that I had experienced in my own life, that I should have done more. So after I read the story, I had to just put the book away and was like, I can't even think about the skills about this now. And I kind of just mulled on that for a few days before I came back and looked at it. In that time, I thought about some alternate rebellion that I had seen, and like you spoke about Giselle, is it?
Mm-hmm.
There's an Australian lady called Grace Tame. I don't know if you guys would know who she is, but she was sexually abused by her high school teacher, repeatedly sexually abused by her high school teacher. And the laws at the time meant that as that trial was happening, he was protected and his name could not be used in the media, but her name and photo was plastered everywhere. Now, what she did, and it started as a teenager, she also is autistic, but she made this, she petitioned and she changed the laws, and now the laws in Australia are different, and especially Tasmania, where perpetrators of sexual assault are not protected in the same way that they were. So she made a huge, massive, radical change here in Australia, and her story is amazing. She has a book called 9 Lives of a Diamond Miner. If I 100% suggest reading it, especially for anyone who has experienced sexual trauma. It is a very inspiring story. She went on to be Australian of the Year. There was a whole big thing with the Prime Minister of Australia at the time, Scott Morrison, trying to force her to hug him and smile in a photo. This woman has alternate rebellion nailed, even down to they put photos up of when she was a teenager and she was smoking a bong in a lounge room. And I think it was a political stunt at the time because everybody was on her side and no one was on the government side. So
yeah, they're trying to prove she's a bad kid, right?
But even the way that she dealt with that, she is amazing. She's definitely someone to look up. And then I also thought about, there's an Australian trans man that I've just started following on Instagram. He popped up recently and he started a hashtag movement called I Can Still Tell. Or I Can Tell, it is, sorry. And it was because he was posting stuff, all of the things that are happening in the US at the moment around trans rights and access to healthcare and all of that kind of stuff. So he'd been posting a bit about his concerns about that here. And there was lots of people in the comments saying, I can still tell that you're female. I can tell that you're a woman. I can tell, and with all of this negative stuff. So he said, we're just going to change it and we're going to use hashtag and I can tell, and we're going to put positive stuff in there. And as soon as he mentioned it, his comment sections were absolutely flooded with, I can tell you're an amazing, caring person. I can tell that you care about your partner. I can tell that you fight against injustice. It was amazing, and I loved that. And so I was looking at these people where I could see examples of alternate rebellion, and I was like, shit, I haven't done anything, and I probably should. Like, injustice
You
is a
totally
big
have.
thing
Your
to me.
podcast episode on your podcast about your suicide story, that is not nothing. That is a
Thanks,
very,
Laurie.
very, very powerful story.
Well, then I started thinking about it, and like Dave, I was like, maybe this doesn't have to be about ways that you just don't go to jail. Channeling these things, and I started thinking about ways that I had rebelled that used maladaptive coping mechanisms, especially in my teenage years, and I still do it now as an adult, but how not so much in destructive ways now, but when I was a teenager and before I knew that I had BPD and I was handling all of the things that you handle in your late teenage lives and relationship breakups and all of the stuff as a super feeler. And I ended up rebelling against my parents and society and what I should do by drinking too much and, being where I wasn't supposed to be, exactly like Andrea in this story, and put myself in so many dangerous situations that actually resulted in some of this same stuff happening. So I was like, okay, so there's heaps of places where I've rebelled and that has actually harmed me further. So I could understand the concept of what Diana was trying to put here. Like, there are ways when you rebel, when you feel strongly or you have intense anger, you can often make things a lot worse for yourself. And in my example, there is a particular case where that literally happened. Things got way worse for me. So then I tried to look at it more from Dave's perspective. And like you said, Laurie, me sharing my suicide story was a huge thing for me and something I was incredibly scared about doing, but did it anyway. And then as a trauma survivor, there was some other things like trusting people for me is an act of alternate rebellion when my vulnerability had been taken advantage of. And for me to be now vulnerable here or in my own podcast or with friends, that is an act of alternate rebellion because it feels unsafe for me to do that, but I still choose it and I get amazing results from that. Building meaningful reciprocal relationships with people when I was told I was unlovable and that the thought of was ingrained in me that I am bad and I deserve the really shitty things that happen to me. The fact that I can still go out and build really meaningful and fulfilling relationships, and even just in spite of BPD, like getting a BPD diagnosis, like you mentioned before, and us here having this conversation with people is an act of alternate rebellion because we are doing positive things that will impact other people despite the stigma that is attached to our illness or despite the things that we've been told through our lives or despite whatever circumstance it is that has brought us. And a lot of people with BPD have experienced trauma of some kind. We're out here doing amazing things. We talked in the last episode. I really wanted to mention then that Dave should probably have a cape, and Heather smashing stigma in her community. These are all acts of alternate rebellion and, cutting people out of our lives that are toxic for us. That is a huge act of alternate rebellion when we are told we are the problem and that the reason that this relationship isn't working is because of us or because of the way we act or because of the way we deal with things or because of the boundaries that we put in place. When we cut those people out of our lives, we are rebelling against that kind of treatment and the injustice around that. So after really it took me a while. This was a hard story, but there were some things that I walked away with instead of just feeling like this is shit. I'm not as amazing as all of these really inspiring people who have done really huge things to create social change and people who I admire and look up to, there are small ways that I'm doing this in my life every day.
Thanks for that, Shannon. Yeah, you do so many amazing things every single day that are small rebellions. And I was thinking while you were talking about the cutting people out of your life is as a rebellion too. And I really do believe that. Like, we're told, you know, you have to have these relationships with like these people because that's the right thing to do. And saying like, well, that's not the right thing for me is rebellion. I think the hard part for me still, and this is, I'm feeling a lot better about this skill now. The hard thing for me now is still that kind of part that Dave was talking about around like, it's asking you to rebel, but rebel in a way that society wants you to rebel, if that makes sense. And like, that's a bit of a hard one to grasp. Like, I mean, even the other day, like Trump saying things about like protests not being allowed for students or something like that. Like, that's A, horrifying, and B, like, well, that is a safe way to rebel that is within your legal rights. And now we're being told that we shouldn't be doing that, right? Like, so there's what is that line of like rebellion in a way that is alternative and not harmful versus sometimes we need to put ourselves in situations that might be a little bit more harmful to like make the change that we need. But I think all the examples that people have provided today have been really good ones for like walking that line and being really brave about it. Despite the potential that like some people are always going to hate what you do. It really doesn't matter. No matter what you do, somebody's going to have a critique of it. And so you got to do what's right for you as opposed to like what's going to benefit everybody else. Kat, does your shirt say rebellion on it? And is that a fluke?
It does actually. It says, when injustice is law, rebellion is due. Yeah. It's a Chris Packham one, who's a really cool autistic guy.
Amazing. Awesome. Any last thoughts on our alternate rebellion before we close up today?
You know, I was thinking there's some episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David starts wearing a MAGA hat when he like wants to like get what he wants or be left alone. And you know, we could get hats made that say borderline, right? Because you know, so you can wear it for two purposes. Number one, if you're like super nice, then it helps to fight the stigma. But also, if you just want to be left alone or you like want to intimidate somebody, you just put the hat on, and then they're going to be like super, you know, hands off and worried, you know.
I love it so much. Yeah, I have a super feeler hat, but maybe I just need a straight up borderline hat. That's way better. I like that.
I am
That's
BPD
awesome.
or something, you know, BPD strong, like it's something like that where you're just like.
That's fantastic. I have not watched Curb Your Enthusiasm in so long, but yeah, that's so good. That sounds like a very Larry David thing to do. Awesome. Okay, well, while I go work on how to get hats made, we will see you guys all. We're recording tomorrow, but we're going to be recording our next episode with Diana to kind of wrap up this book with her, and that'll come out in 2 weeks from this episode. So thank you guys so much. You are my favorite, and I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Super Feeler podcast. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded territory of the Matsqui and Sumas First Nations. If you'd like to learn more about the Super Feeler podcast, share your story, or participate in the Super Feelers Club, which is our peer support group, it's totally free, virtual, and open to anyone who experiences intense emotions or has borderline personality disorder, please check out the link in our show notes or go to laurieedmondson.com. If you would like to support the show, we would very much appreciate it. There's an option to do monthly small donations at whatever denomination you'd like, and you get bonus content, extra resources, and extra connection to me throughout. That can be found on patreon.com/superfeeler, or again in the notes below. Thanks again, and have a great day.